Welcome to our program this week called To Serve. For a lot of people, their experience of religious brothers, religious sisters, first happens when they are in school and they see these wonderful servants of God devoting themselves to the education of children. We're with such a religious brother today, Brother Paul Montero, and he's going to be sharing with us how he was called to serve. Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to another program called To Serve. I'm always excited when we have fellow religious on the show, and today we're really going to be celebrating a vocation that I don't think gets enough attention, enough love, that of religious brothers. We're joined today by Brother Paul Montero, and he's going to be sharing with us how he was called to the Brothers of the Sacred Heart and how he first experienced his vocation. Welcome, Brother Paul.
Thank you very much, Father. If I can, I'd like to jump ahead before answering that question directly about my own personal call, and you'll understand why once I explain. I once had the job as a brother of being vocation director. We don't like to use the word recruiter, but that enters into part of it. And especially in talking one-on-one with young men who were talking about the possibility, I would say to them, as I told my story, please, don't make such an important decision the way I, Brother Paul, made such an important decision. And now I'll go back to the beginning.
So you're warning us ahead of time not to use you as an example of how this is done the correct way.
Except in certain aspects.
Okay,
because
all right.
I believe even though the first decision was not done the way I would want a discerner, a person thinking about brotherhood or religious life or priesthood, to do it, what led up to that decision actually is worth thinking about and perhaps reflecting on and imitating.
And God certainly gets us to the right place with crooked lines sometimes.
Absolutely.
Where we don't do the right thing, but God still ends up in the right place.
Absolutely. So I'm going to back up. I come from a small town, Donaldsonville, Louisiana, which is on the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. I first was educated by the Daughters of Charity from kindergarten through 5th grade. At 6th grade, I switched over to a school conducted by the Brothers of the Sacred Heart and went through 6 years with them. And it wasn't until I was a senior in high school that the possibility of becoming a brother even entered my mind. And that in itself is very surprising because I became very close to the brothers who taught me. They were more than teachers. Honestly, they were friends. They were buddies. Several of the young brothers there were involved with us outside of school. We went hunting. We went fishing. We went swimming. We did a lot of things together, and I was very close. I admired the brothers. I respected the brothers. I really liked what I saw about the brothers, and I never thought about joining the brothers. I arrived at being a senior in high school. A vocation director, recruiter, comes into the school. He gives a talk and call it inspiration. By the time the talk was over and he distributed these small pieces of paper for us to indicate, and the wording was interesting. The wording said, "At this time, what do you think God is calling you to become?" I checked off to be a brother, turned it in, and almost forgot that I had done it. About 5-6 weeks later, he returns to the school to follow up with those of us who had checked off possibility of brotherhood. I get a note to report to the principal's office. I walk in, I see the vocation director. I remember what I had done and quickly tried to explain to him, "Brother, honestly, I don't think that's meant to be taken word for word. I never thought about being a brother. I don't think that's for me, brother, I'm going steady. I've been with the same girl for 2 years now. Well, he interrupted and he said, relax, Paul, I'm not here to tie you up and bring you to New Orleans. I said, sit down, let's talk. And we talked for over an hour. And again, it had to be the Holy Spirit. When I walked out of that office, I just knew, don't ask me how, I just knew I was going to apply to join the brothers.
Well, that's wonderful, and certainly, again, God can surprise us even when we want to serve Him as to where He's going to call us or how we're going to serve Him. But you did skip ahead a little bit, because I want to talk a little bit about how your family may have laid a foundation. Because obviously, you were already a practicing Catholic, you were in Catholic education, so there must have been a life of prayer, a life of community, a life of being connected to the church that was already there. So I'd like you to back up just a little bit and tell us, as you were growing up, what did your family do? How was Catholicism lived in your home?
Very good. I come from a small family. I have one older brother, one older sister. My sister is now deceased. My brother is still living. Very close-knit, even though my father was not present a lot, because my father worked 3 jobs in order to keep us in Catholic school. So a lot of times he would be gone in the morning when we got up for school. He wouldn't come back until late at night after we were already in bed. So although we were close, and my mom made it a point to find ways for us to be connected, even to the point sometimes on a Friday night, she would wake us up at 11:15, knowing that Dad was going to come home at midnight, and we would just wait, and invariably he knew he would bring home, we were very poor, but he would bring home maybe a few oranges, a big bag of popcorn, and we would sit around as family and just spend time together. The main thing I remember about my family is honestly not that we were a deeply religious family in terms of praying together. As I look back, I wonder why, because both my father and my mother, I found out later in life, had a personal prayer life that I wasn't aware of growing up. So we didn't pray together. We didn't say the rosary together. What I saw in my mom and my dad was tremendous service. As early as I can remember, they were involved in church. They were involved especially in young people's lives. We had something in my small town called Teen Town, where on Saturday nights there would be a dance, sometimes with a live band, most of the time with a jukebox, for young teenagers to have a place to go, get off the street, do something healthy and wholesome. My mom and dad began that when I was probably 10 years old, and they did that all the way until I finished high school and joined the brothers. Every Saturday night, they were dedicating themselves to helping young people do something instead of just hanging on the streets. My mother and father both loved to cook, and every time there was some event at school, honoring the football team, end of the year graduation supper, whatever it was, Mom and Dad would be involved in cooking and in serving whatever was going on. They encouraged us to get involved. My sister and I especially did many, many things for the Daughters of Charity. When I was in grammar school and even in high school, my sister was still at the convent, the girls' school, and I was across the street at the boys' school. But my parents urged us, go ask the sisters, go ask the brothers what they need done. You have nothing going on Saturday. So service to other people was just part and parcel of what I experienced from Mom and Dad, and through them, what I started doing. I tutored classmates all through high school because my mom used to tell me, God has given you a brain, you've got to share it. Not just use it, but share it. And if I can just make that connection, that became part of my vocation, although I didn't know it at the time. I've been a teacher, if you wish, since I was about 12 years old, and I always loved it.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about not so much a strong family prayer collectively, but really a life of service. And here, when you look at vocations, you weren't called to the priesthood, which would be more of a liturgical leader, more of a prayer leader, but a brother who's more called to serve. And so even in that, obviously your family was helping you to recognize some aspect of church life, some aspect of vocation that really took root in you. That real call to serve, that call to be a part of serving others that isn't always rooted in leading prayer, which isn't always liturgical in nature. And so that's exciting because it really does show, in a sense, how that connected even to your later vocation.
I think another aspect, my mom and dad, because they were so involved in church and they were involved in our education, we always had brothers in and out of our house. We lived close to the school, and so it was walking distance. And they couldn't do that with the Daughters of Charity because the daughters lived a much stricter life in those days and weren't allowed to visit homes hardly at all, whereas brothers were. So we constantly were having brothers coming over for a fish fry or a rabbit. My father was a hunter, a rabbit supper. And so I got to see brothers in a different light, and I got to see how much they enjoyed being together, which down the road became a very important part of the call, because I'm a people person, and would be another reason why I suppose priesthood never entered my mind, even though brotherhood at first didn't enter my mind. I need people, and therefore, for me, community life was a big, big call.
Well, that's exciting because, again, I think it shows the importance of, if young people see happy religious, happy priests, happy sisters, happy all of these deacons, that really, for them, shows them that, if God calls me to this, and he may or may not, but if he calls me to this, he's not calling me to some dreadful existence. You got to see brothers at joy, brothers in celebration, brothers doing things that they liked, hunting, fishing, these sorts of things. That's so important because when you're discerning that call, do you really know what you're being called to? Well, you had at least some sense that the life you were being called to was not a life of, all I'm going to do is work out in the garden the rest of my life and never see people again.
Correct.
It's very exciting that's a part of what young people, they're able to see.
And if I can jump a little bit ahead, as I said, I made that decision to apply for the brothers very spontaneously. We could hardly say it was a discernment process. What happened was, in those days, we had to go to Metuchen, New Jersey, a very small town in New Jersey, for the initial formation. I arrived there, and it didn't take me long to have time to think. And I realized I am here for the wrong reasons. You don't make such an important decision. I was 18 years old. You don't make such an important decision so quickly, so spontaneously, and not for the greatest of motives. So I said to myself, either I find correct motives, right motives, or I go home. So I started praying and thinking and talking with my spiritual director, one of the brothers who was in charge of our formation. And it was very, very easy to arrive at a conclusion. I looked back on my life and I saw clearly, which I had not reflected on before, going back to those early days, 12, 13, 14, 15, when I was tutoring my classmates night after night, weekend after weekend, enjoying, communicating, sharing my knowledge, seeing the results of it, entering into a relationship with certain of my classmates that I would not have had otherwise. I reflected on how much I admired the brothers, respected the brothers, but more importantly, I was so aware as I thought about it, the impact that these men had, not just on my life, but on the lives of my friends. I could remember some of my buddies who got into trouble at home or wherever, and the personal time that a brother gave to that individual. I was lucky. I didn't have serious conflicts or problems growing up. I was blessed. But I saw some of my friends who were going through rough times, and I saw the attention that brothers gave to them outside of class time.
And you felt that that support that they were able to give really solidified your understanding of who they were and what that calling would entail.
Absolutely. And I thought they had a tremendous impact for good upon my life and my buddies, the life of my buddies. I think I can have that kind of impact. And I looked at myself and I said, look at my gifts. You know, I like people. I like working with people, being with people. I had begun to develop a personal prayer life, and that seemed to me that was starting to make more and more sense and become more and more important in my life. I liked very much the specific, I didn't call it this at the time, but I was aware of the specific spirituality of the Brothers of the Sacred Heart, this whole spirituality of love coming out of the heart of Jesus and seeing in the heart of Jesus the heart of everybody else, and trying to relate to people and trying to understand people and be compassionate with people the way the heart of Jesus would be understanding and compassionate and patient. And all of that just resonated.
We're going to come back to that. We have to take a break here for a moment, but I'd like to come back a little bit to the charism and spirituality of the Brothers of the Sacred Heart so we could talk a little bit about how that discernment also took place. We'll be right back with Brother Paul.
Hi, I'm Austin Wayne, and you're watching Catholic Life Television, which helps us evangelize in this year of faith.
Welcome back to our program Called to Serve. We're here with Brother Paul Montero of the Brothers of Sacred Heart, and he's telling us a little bit about how he very early on made a spontaneous decision. And it's funny because many of the scenes that are behind us talk about very spontaneous callings in the lives of some of the saints, but how with time and discernment and prayer, you really began to feel at home with the idea of joining these men, the Brothers of the Sacred Heart. So I want to ask you a little bit, as a fellow religious, I'm aware that within the formation process, there's a novitiate year and these times to really spiritually prepare yourself. What was it during that time that made you feel at home, knowing that this group of men could be a place where you would have a happy life, a happy vocation?
I think the first part was the people. As I mentioned, back in those days, even from the South, we had to go up to New Jersey. And I spent my first 2 years in formation in New Jersey. And then after 2 years, I took first vows, I made first profession, and then went down to Mobile, Alabama to Spring Hill College for college studies. But from the first day that I arrived in Metuchen, I liked the people. The brothers that they had assembled there as our staff, both teachers and formation directors, understandably were phenomenal. I mean, they were just committed to the formation process, loved young people, communicated that love to us, and the young men like me surrounding me were terrific guys. I get along with people generally rather easily, and so I had no trouble making friends right away. I was older than most. In those days, being an 18-year-old was more unusual than usual. Most young men were joining the brothers back in those days at the age of 13, 14, 15.
Well, those were also the days when high school seminaries, so even men
Exactly.
considering the priesthood would have started at high school age
Right.
rather than after graduation.
Exactly. So I was older, but I was able to relate to the younger students as well. Being older, however, I almost automatically moved into leadership positions, even with my own classmates, and that continued through the years of formation. That also, I believe, nurtured my vocation because it called out of me gifts of leadership that I had begun back in high school using, but now I realize that even as a brother, especially as a brother, leadership talents can be put to service of young people and of my brothers. So being comfortable, you use that word comfortable, being comfortable in that first year and then the second year was very, very important to me. I use the image often in talking with men who are thinking about religious life of the hand in the glove. I think of the glove as being religious life, this particular religious life, Brothers of the Sacred Heart, and the hand being the individual. You can have a wonderful congregation, and I think we do, and you can have a wonderful candidate, but unless it's a good, comfortable fit, the vocation is not there. And I felt, I didn't use that image back then, but I felt comfortable, I felt at home, and nothing happened, I was blessed, nothing happened along the way that caused me to doubt my being there. And honestly, that has been true all through my life.
Well, I do want to ask you a quick question, because obviously when we're trying to follow God, there are obstacles. Certain people or certain attitudes that we have. Were there any obstacles? Were there things that at any time maybe didn't cause you any doubts, but that you had to get past, that you had to overcome in this? Because I know it's not always easy being in formation and having to fit into the glove, as it were.
And again, we have to remember that we're talking about 55 years ago. Religious life was very different then than it is now. The first big challenge I had was, within just weeks. Back home, I had many good friends, including girlfriends. Some were friends of my sister, but who were always at the house, 1 year older than I. Well, I started receiving letters, a lot of letters, from friends back home. And girls tend to write more than boys, apparently. And it was just kind of the custom for so many of the girls to sign their letters, "Love you lots," so-and-so. Well, and the custom back then was the master of formation, the formation director, would open your mail. Now, usually he didn't read it, but at least you'd get a letter, an envelope already opened. Boy, he was reading at least parts of mine, and he called me into the office one night and he said, I noticed that you're receiving these letters and they love you. Well, bottom line was, he said I had to cut off those letters, cut off correspondence. I tried to explain to him that the girl that I had been going steady with for 2 years had not written me a single letter. She called it off when I called it off. These were just good friends. Nevertheless, he said, no, it's better that you not. That was difficult. How do you explain to a friend who happened to be a girl that you've been close to all those years that we won't communicate, we won't correspond anymore? Big challenge, but not enough for me to say, that's it, I'm getting out. No.
Well, and obviously with community life, you have to understand that the focus begins to become more on the community that you're forming yourself to, and it can't be as much on the former community that you were a part of. And so there's always, again, if we look at these pictures, Jesus says to the apostles, "Come follow me." They had to leave the boat and the Father behind, and they had to follow him. And so there is some of that, but that is a challenge, as some of those relationships are strained.
Sure, and I made it sound much too cut and dry. The director of formation was much more pastoral than that. He explained to me the why and the very things that you just said, and I was able to understand and accept, even though it was difficult.
Now, we have a few minutes left. I want to ask a little bit. You made a very sudden decision, and again, many of the saints did the same thing, but over time began to feel more and more that the Holy Spirit was drawing you in this direction. And for some of our young people who might be watching, let me ask you, are you happy? Did you really feel in the end that this was the place where you could find the fulfillment you were looking for?
Absolutely. It's been 55 wonderful years. Some of them have been more challenging than others. I've held almost every job that a brother in our area can hold. Each one has presented its own challenges, but each one has, I think, called out of me different gifts, sometimes gifts that I didn't know that I had. But I've been surrounded by supportive people. My family, my mom, my dad, when they were alive, my brother, my sister, have supported me through and through, living with men who believe the same things that you believe, working with young people, of course. That in itself, many of the gray hairs I have came from those young people, I'm sure, but there's nothing more exciting than every day going with a new group of young people. Nothing is the same tomorrow as it was yesterday. And so I've just had a very fulfilling life and a very happy life.
Now, before we close, I'd also just like to ask, if there's a young man who feels he's called to serve the church, is there any one thing that you would make him consider to be a brother? What is it about the life of the brother that might stand out, that would give a young man an indication that's what he's called to be?
We describe being a brother as our attempt to keep alive the memory of Jesus, our brother. Because as we know, Jesus wasn't a priest, wasn't a rabbi. He called himself brother, lived in community, deeply spiritual, and very, very active. So those are the combinations that a young man or a not so young man would hopefully have within himself to think about brother. Not to be attracted to the ministerial vocation, to be of service to people in a different way through the sacraments primarily, but rather to be of service to young people in education, in nursing, in social work, whatever it might be, through community living together, sharing the same ideals, sharing the same table, sharing the same lifestyle for the purpose of doing something for other people, in our case, for young people.
Well, that's wonderful, brother. We really do want to thank you for joining us today, for sharing with us some of your story and the amazing ways that God brought you to the religious life that you are called to. I ask that you would once again continue to pray for those who are in the Diocese of Baton Rouge, for the brothers, sisters, and priests, to continue to pray for your own vocations, and ask the Holy Spirit to continue to call many to serve.